Welcome to Inspired Change, a new inspirational and motivational broadcast that strives to empower men in a positive way, designed to educate, empower, and inspire even the busiest individual on the go over that first cup of coffee. Please join me in welcoming Gunter, international psychologist, author, speaker, and producer.
Welcome everybody to another episode of Inspired Change. I hope this finds everybody in a relatively good space. Here in Sydney, we are continuing to observe lockdown. At least most of us are. Some of us are not. So, a bit of a community problem. It looks like we're facing that problem for another 2 weeks, at least. So the idea is we need to stay at home, practice social distancing, and go out only really fundamentally for exercise and the absolute necessities for living. So for a lot of people that's really quite frustrating. And I don't want to make this podcast about, COVID-19 and the lockdowns and all the frustrations and so on. I'll probably do something about that another time. Because what I really want to focus on in this podcast is an extension of the idea of fighting fair in relationships and how we need, in essence, to reframe our thinking about conflict and about arguments, that they don't need to be destructive. We can have decent conflict and maintain civility, respect, and care in that process and get somewhere constructively with it. So in the last episode, I talked about some principles in the whole notion of fighting fair, going from key values like love, respect, cooperation, to also looking at getting rid of, eliminating the four horsemen of the apocalypse that often emerge in relationships. And those, just for a recap, are criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling. Now, one of the other things that most of you who've been following my podcasts have been aware of is how much emphasis I place on the whole notion of attachment and attachment styles in relationships. And I think when we look at those four horsemen of the apocalypse and think about where these behaviours come from, then we very quickly begin to see a connection between the four horsemen and issues around attachment. So that's attachment issues in childhood and how those attachment issues in childhood got carried on into adulthood. As a partner, and when I practice the principle of taking ownership for my part in the problem, I always need to check in with myself about, am I being overly critical? Am I being contemptuous in my relationship with my partner about an issue or just in general? Why is it that I might be getting defensive when my partner wants to communicate with me about a particular topic, whether it's benign or a bit sensitive? And what's stonewalling really about? Okay, so what I want to dig into in this podcast is let's understand the connection between the four horsemen and attachment. So just as a quick reminder, let me just run through those four attachment styles that we tend to talk about. Okay? And it's boiled down to, fundamentally, that what we're aiming to do as parents in raising our children is to create a securely attached child. Now, when that doesn't happen, we run into some issues. One is that we might have a child that develops an anxious or dismissive or a fearful sort of attachment where they're not secure. And so with it, then comes the development of certain defense mechanisms. And this is where I come back to that issue about the Four Horsemen. So, sometimes I hear criticism when there isn't criticism. Now, it took me quite a while in therapy to get that connection and understand that not everything I'm hearing is exactly what my partner has said or has intended to say. Right? Now, if I'm contemptuous, I'm essentially being dismissive of the other person, and that might be a self-protection mechanism in order to, buffer the pain that I potentially might experience in the relationship. And defensiveness is, let's go on the attack before we're attacked. Okay, so again, it comes from a place wherein I felt wounded and I need to protect myself. I need to get on top of it. And obviously stonewalling is a process of withdrawal. And one of the things that happens is that often in a relationship we apply one or two or a combination of the four in a way to deal with the potential of feeling hurt or just thinking, I'm always going to get the wrong end of the stick, as it were. So let me come back then to the point of origin, and that is the whole issue about what it is that we're trying to do as a parent when we raise our kids, so that when they're adults, firstly, they're able to have mature, secure, and solid relationships, healthy relationships with a partner, and ones that can help us individually and as a couple to grow rather than drag us into the toxic sludge of conflict and potential separation and divorce. So let me come back to some developmental stuff, and I'm going to go back to Gordon Neifeld's material in the sense of, the work that he's done to put a really solid framework together to understand what it is that we need to do to raise children that are much, much more self-aware, reflective, flexible and resilient. Okay, so he's talked in his in some of the YouTube videos and so on about the first 6 years of a child's growth. And, I'm always reminded when I look at these stages of what the Jesuits have said, and that is, give me the boy before the age of 7 and I will give you a man. So this knowledge, in a sense, has been known for a long time, but it's, only recently now where we're starting to understand that some of the stuff that we're seeing within, the therapeutic space and within social situations as being maladaptive is that we're really connecting it to the whole issue of attachment. Okay, so, I'm both a parent and a grandparent, and I now have a 6-year-old grandson, a 4.5-year-old grandson, and an almost 5-year-old granddaughter. So I'm spanning some of this. But I was also aware as a parent, when my kids were going through the first 6 to 7 years of their time here on Earth, in a sense, that's, we brought them into the world, of what they actually needed. Now, I had an advantage, and my wife had an advantage, because they were educated and we're well experienced. Even then, we're well experienced in the whole issue about developmental issues for human beings, right through from birth to death. So what's going on in the first 6 years for a child? Okay, and I'm not going to make it gender-based at this point. This is for children. Doesn't matter whether they're boy or girl. So in the first year, the whole basis of a child's experience is that they just want to be with us. In that space, one of the things that we are tasked as a parent is to be able to go in there and meet that child's immediate needs. Now, in many respects, initially that's quite basic. making sure that they get lots of love and attention, and lots of cuddles. Touch is really, really important. That we also take care of their physical needs, because they can't do it, obviously. And so, making sure that they don't sit in a dirty nappy for too long, or that they don't go hungry for very long. And kids, babies in particular, are very good at catching our attention. And, a lot of people very early on in a baby's life start getting this idea that we need to have a child delay their needs being met. And to me, that's just not appropriate. Whenever I hear a baby cry, my immediate instinct is to go to that baby and pick them up and give them a cuddle. Now, that's okay with my own kids and my grandkids, but obviously I need to resist that urge with other kids. But I get very frustrated when I see parents who don't necessarily in that first year of life respond immediately to a child's needs. Now, sometimes stuff happens and you can't immediately necessarily do it. For example, if the bathtub's overflowing and you're trying to turn the thing off and the kid's starting to scream, you turn the bathtub off and then attend to the child. But again, in that first year, delaying meeting that child's needs is problematic. So what happens then in the second year? According to Gordon Neufeld, this is where a child really wants to get to a place where they feel liked. That's what they're orientating themselves to. I want to be liked. So, there's all sorts of engaging behaviours, and, they're cute and cuddly, and then some people start talking about, well, then there's the terrible twos and so on. And one of the things that I think is really important as a parent to recognise that often, we need to understand that what we class as bad behaviour is actually expressing the desire to have a need met. So we need to be able to understand what need that might be. And it's really, really important to get down to that. In the third year, the child's really preoccupied with this sense of belonging. And part of that is to be also obedient. And so, this is a particularly important stage. So our interaction with that child needs to be acknowledging and validating and getting them into a space where they continue to feel that we are there for them no matter what. And yes, there are certain behaviours that we may not like, but the notion, the foundation of unconditional love is exceptionally important. In the fourth year, Neufeld talks about that the child is on this huge quest to matter. And I'll watch this with my grandkids. They really try to sort of strike out, a space for themselves wherein they get acknowledgement and recognition. Now, by the fifth year, and I'm making this all very simple, okay? It's a lot more complicated than that, but if we keep on the key concepts, we're, in a pretty good space. During the fifth year, this is where the child really begins to respond, and he talks about, a child now gives its heart to whom he or she loves. And the idea is that we provide a space where children are able to express that loving and that caring, and we need to respond to them. Now, in the sixth year, and this is where a lot of kids are striking out into school and the social context of society at large, is they're looking for openness and transparency and intimacy. And so often, at that stage, kids will, in a healthy relationship, will share with us everything. There's no hidden stuff, really. Secrecy often, emerges as a process of self-protection. So, again, let's more specifically look at what is it that I need to do as a parent in that sort of context with my child or my grandkids, because a lot of us as grandparents are there, because we're largely, for a lot of times, the primary caregiver for extended periods of time. So there's 4 key things that I think we really need to focus on, and this is well accepted within the community where people are really into the whole attachment process. The first thing is that we need to be responsive. Being on your mobile phone or on a tablet or involved in your computer while your child's sitting there next to you is not a way in which we connect well. So we're actually not really that responsive. So when we're with our children, we need to be available. We need to be able then to respond to what they want and need. The other factor that is critical is consistency, especially around routines. I'm often very sort of bothered when I see kids, at 8:30, 9 o'clock, and especially little ones, around 1 or 2 years old, being out there when the parents are at the pub or at some venue. This is when they should be at home, really, being tucked into bed, having a story and going to sleep. The other aspect, the third element that's really absolutely fundamentally important, as well all of those 4, but, how do I create a sense that my child feels like it's getting unconditional love and care? Now, when they're little, most of us tend to do that. But by 7, 8 and 9, some of that now starts to change. Parents' expectations about performance, about, being good, all of these things kick in where often the children develop a sense of they're not really sure whether they're unconditionally loved and cared for. They become ambivalent. They become insecure, and that's when they often, really start to develop anxieties. Now, the last one, the 4th one, and I think this is really, really crucial as well, is that we need to help a child into a state where they can experience separation as something healthy. Okay, so when we start taking the child to kindy or to daycare, we need to explain to the child, we need to prepare them for that. This is, we're going here and this is why, and then I'm going to pick you up. And part of that process is also establishing a sort of routine around hellos and goodbyes. And I'm going to be blunt about that. I think that needs to be kept right through into late adolescence. When my kids come to visit with their kids, we have rituals around greeting each other and, expressing, affection. So, we give each other a kiss and a hug, and we emphasise how nice it is to see you, and, let's sort of settle down. So there's a real ritual, there's a real routine around that. And it's about reconnection. So, one of the things that I get from a lot of parents is that, when I drop my teenager, 14, 15-year off at school, he just bolts out of the car. As far as I'm concerned, that's not acceptable. We say goodbye to each other, we give each other a kiss, and we tell each other we love each other. And that's it. You don't get out of the car until that's done. And yes, you might get some shtick from your peers, but family's more important than your peers. So I hope that gives you some food for thought, because fundamentally secure attachment means healthy adults. Healthy physically, healthy emotionally, and healthy in relationships. And we've got a lot of work to do in our culture to maintain or to regain better connections, better attachment. The digital world has really seriously interfered with this. And, we need to limit our exposure to things like smartphones, iPads, any tablets for that matter, and the amount of time we spend in and around technology. It's unhealthy. It disturbs attachment, no matter what age. I watch people often in restaurants, and there's a couple, and it doesn't mean they're a young couple. I've watched this with 60-year-olds where they're fundamentally having dinner out, but each of them is on their smartphone, scrolling, I guess, Facebook or Instagram or whatever it is, but they're not attending to one another. In the next session, I'm going to, again, give you some snapshots about when this issue of attachment becomes disturbed. Now, again, keep in mind that in 20 minutes, I have a certain limited amount of time to present, the information in a way that it's digestible. But think about it. If you feel the need, get in touch with me. If you need to, you can Google me, or you can get in touch with Noir Entertainment, and we can take it from there. I would love to hear from you. Okay, until next time, this is me signing off.
Thank you for listening to Inspire Change with Gunter. Gunter Swoboda does individual and group coaching for men looking to grow. For more information on this and the global Making Good Men Great movement, check out goodmengreat.com to get into contact. If you have a topic for the show or would like to be a guest on the air, please email producers at miranda@noirtainment.com. That's Miranda, Miranda, at noirtainment, noirtainment.com. Thank you, and always keep inspiring change.